Everyone, thank you for being patient as we waited for some traffic delays, but our illustrious author is here. Welcome to the October Fic Night for Fanfic Talk. I'm your host, Mage Maddie, here with the lovely Melanie RonsGirlFriday, as you know her on the forums. Tonight, we're going to be reading her story from last year, I believe, called Clair de Lune, that was written for Sapphic Sunrise's Trans Women Are Women Challenge, in which I believe you placed, if I'm correct. Maybe. It was a long time ago. I don't remember either. If you want to join our community, you can join us on the forums at fanfictalk.com. And you can also join our wonderfully moderated archives at fanfictalk.com/archive. So let's just hop right on into reading the story. So this story is in the Harry Potter universe. It is rated for all audiences. There are no content warnings. And it's a good time. All right. You look like your mom never did really mean you look like your mom. Not exactly. It meant you had her flaxen hair, though you never did have her long, unkempt waves. The ones she tied back fruitlessly, little strands coming untucked as she worked, sneaking out of their bun. The ones you loved to run your fingers through when she let you brush her hair. You wore yours long, but not nearly as long as hers, a shaggy cut that tickled your ears and kissed your shirt collar. Mom and Daddy probably wouldn't have cared if you had worn it longer, but there was that one time, when you were 5, when in a fit of conformity you demanded that your hair be cut, just like that Muggle boy's down the lane. Mom obliged, and you hated it. Hated the stiffness, the harsh, bristly feel against your fingertips when you ran them across the back. You grew it out again, but not like Mom's. Never quite like Mom's. More like Daddy, who wore his just above the shoulders. It swished about your cheeks and your chin as you ran, shiny, healthy, and long, for a boy. It meant you had the same little dimple in your left cheek when you smiled, but the mole that appeared next to your nose was only ever that, just a mole. They called the spot above Mom's lip a beauty mark. It meant you had her distinguished facial features, though your eyes were always Daddy's. You, thankfully, did not get his rather large and somewhat misshapen nose. You had the gentle angle of Mom's jaw, the nose that came a little too much to a point, the cleft chin that had always given her face that beautiful peculiarity, that bit of strangeness that took her beyond the conventional, into the captivating. You walked in that twilight between plain and pretty, for a boy. Mom told you once that when you were born, you looked just like Daddy. It was silly, of course. You'd seen photographs of yourself as a baby, and you just looked like a baby. But somewhere along the way, you'd taken after her, and as far back as you could remember, people occasionally commented in praise at parties, in shops, walking down the lane. He takes after you more and more every day, Pandora. Mom would laugh and point out Daddy's eyes, and she always said that when you laughed, you looked like the most like Daddy, and when you were deep in thought, you did rather look like her. But when you were sleeping, she said, when your face was peaceful and still, especially when the moon shone through your window just right, that was when you looked the most like you. After Mom died, people searched your face eagerly for her ghost. Oma and Opa, Daddy's business contacts, family friends you saw perhaps once a year, and she supposed they thought it comforted you as much as it did them. You look so much like your mom. Daddy searched your face too, and sometimes he thought he might be on the verge of saying it, but he never did. Not back then. But then, the rack spurts were particularly bad for a year or two after she died. It didn't bother you that they said it. They meant well, even if they were wrong. You didn't really look like her. You confirmed that fact in the mirror 1,000 times, but it was a nice thought all the same. Maybe when you got older, you would look like her. At least, you wished you could. The peculiar thing was, you also didn't look like you. You'd have liked to see how you looked when you were sleeping, to see what she had always seen, but you hadn't worked out yet how to do that. Maybe when you got older, you decided, maybe then, you would look like you. At least, you wanted to. It was the spring before you started at Hogwarts, when the thought occurred to you that the reason you didn't look like you was that you weren't you at all. You pondered this carefully, examined its angles and its curves. You laid your cheek against the pillow, pretending to slumber, a mirror propped next to your face, and you opened your eyes rapidly, hoping to catch your reflection still asleep. You couldn't, but you realized it didn't matter. The more you considered, the less you could deny it. No, indeed. You were not you at all, and you hadn't been for 11 years. You padded downstairs one evening to Daddy's workroom, standing patiently on the landing until he looked up from his editing. I'm not Linus, you said, as calmly and reasonably as if announcing you weren't particularly hungry. No, Daddy agreed, after a long moment's silence. I'm afraid you're right. Is that why there have been so many nargles around lately? You hadn't even considered the nargles, but it made so much sense now. Yes, I think so. Well then. He waited patiently, hands folded in his lap. Who are you? You thought for a few minutes, pulling a loose thread from the sleeve of your jumper. How could you know who you were if you didn't even know what you looked like? But then your eye was drawn to the window, where the moon was just beginning to climb above the horizon, and you remembered what Mom had said about your face, peaceful and real in the moonlight. Luna. I'm Luna. Daddy admitted to you that he didn't know the first thing about raising a girl, and you thought that was only fair considering you hardly knew the first thing about how to be one. At that moment, you missed Mom just as keenly as the day she died. He asked if perhaps you ought to have new clothes to start, but that didn't interest you much. You weren't especially fond of the dresses or skirts you'd seen other little girls wearing in the village. Whenever Mom had worn muggle clothes, it was most often jeans and dungarees, faded t-shirts when she was experimenting, and billowing blouses when she was not, and she looked perfectly lovely. You had decided you were happy with what you had at the time, though at some point it would be a good idea to replace your too short striped pajamas with polka dotted ones, preferably the correct length, of course, but the polka dot part was most important. You applied yourself to the crucial task of growing your hair longer. It was an inexcusably slow process, an inconvenience, frankly. Didn't your hair realize you hadn't got all day? It was your hair's stubborn refusal to grow faster that made you second-guess yourself, a brief but frightening moment on a hot July afternoon. If this was who you were, then why didn't you look like you? Your Hogwarts letter came the very next day, addressed to Miss Luna Lovegood, and the day after that you could have sworn your hair had grown an inch overnight. What you did love was jewelry, and you asked if perhaps you could wear some of Mom's. And you could see in Daddy's eyes that he wanted so badly to give that to you, but you also saw the pain there at the thought of disturbing anything in her jewelry box. Whether it was because he couldn't bear reopening the wound, or whether he worried that, being young still, you might lose or damage something precious, you could not tell. But you simply said, okay, Daddy, and set about creating your own baubles, stringing together the bottle corks you'd amassed that you'd always known would come in handy someday. Mom never was one for dainty jewelry, and she never was interested in gems, drawn instead to the enamel and resin and wood, unpolished stones, things wrapped in wire, things that jingled and jangled and swung merrily about her neck. And you thought that she'd have loved your necklace, would have asked you to make one for her, too. You loved the gentle weight of it about your neck, the way you always knew it was there, a part of you. But when Daddy first saw you wearing it, he sat deep in thought before rising wordlessly from his chair and exiting the room, returning moments later with Mom's jewelry box. It's yours, he said, setting it before you. She would have wanted you to have it. It's always been yours. I'm sorry I was wrong. You poured over the contents, the chains and beads falling through your fingers, bangles stacked from wrist to elbow, just like you'd done when you were small, and it seemed you could recall each and every time she had worn each piece. They were yours, indeed, but it seemed it was not your time to wear them. They still felt so much like her, and your Hagman necklace was you. But you paused upon a pair of earrings, the one she picked up in some muggle shop in London, and remembered the day she'd worn them home, not saying a word, waiting for you to notice. Mommy, you've got dirigible plums hanging on your ears. They were her favorites because they were your favorites. You pocketed the dirigible plum baubles before closing the box and tucking it safely underneath your bed. Daddy didn't argue when you asked to have your ears pierced, but the witch in Diagon Alley wouldn't do it, not for a little boy, and Daddy didn't know enough to try to navigate the muggle shops. Luckily, Gloria Seo knew how to pierce ears, you found out in third year when you finally admitted to her that you wanted it done. She did yours right there in the dormitory as you squeezed Margot Folly's hand. Gloria didn't dare try it the magical ways, fearing she'd blow your ears off. She had to do it the way she'd learned from her muggle cousin, who'd done it for Gloria behind her parents' backs with a needle and cork, numbing your ears with a cube of ice. Gloria was the kindest of your classmates, and she'd always offered to share her makeup with you whenever the other girls were getting done up. You didn't care too much about makeup then, just as well, because teachers like to dock points for excessive makeup, and on anyone under fourth year that really meant any at all. But you did decide once to try her nail polish, an ethereal blue, for Ravenclaw, that looked like you dipped your fingers in liquid moonlight. You never considered yourself vain, but when at last you were able to put on your dirigible plum earrings, very carefully, faced close to the mirror as you navigated the process, you pulled back and studied the effect with satisfaction. There, in the mirror, was you. Really you. Your hair well past your shoulders now, beloved baubles adorning your ears, your cork necklace around your neck. It reminded you who you were, and it was certainly no coincidence that you hadn't had any trouble from the nargles since you'd started wearing it. And while there was no moonlight in the room, and as far as you knew, you weren't asleep, for the first time you were certain you were seeing what Mom had always seen when she'd watched you sleeping peacefully. A curious ache came over you. Not bad, simply a persistent tugging. And it took you a moment, studying your face, its angles and curves, to realize why. There you are, you whispered, touching your fingertips to the cool glass, and you wish that somebody who'd known her could have been there at that moment to say it, because it was true. She was there in the shape of your jaw, in your curious chin, in dirty blonde tangles and butterbeer corks and dirigible plums, in all these things that had always been a part of you, no matter whether you wore trousers or makeup, no matter the state of your hair, no matter that you had Daddy's eyes. She was always there, and she always had been, the one who'd seen you when you hadn't seen yourself. And now that you did finally see, you'd never lose either of you again. How wonderful to be seen when you were awake, a moon in the daylight hours. The end. Melanie. Oh, goodness.
Hi.
We have a wonderful comment from Carl saying that this fic equals love and it's his all-time favorite story.
Thank you, Carl. It's like the sweetest thing ever.
Okay. So, this is a phenomenal story, and obviously this was written for a challenge. I think I actually wrote it for 2 challenges, if I'm go back to the story summary. So you wrote this for the Trans Woman and Woman Challenge and the Coming Out Challenge, which obviously pairs pretty well together. So my first question for you is, what made you decide to go with Luna for this character, or for this fic in general?
God, what did make me decide to go with Luna? I guess I don't know. Luna was kind of someone that popped to mind just because of her difference from everyone, and so that seemed to sort of fit with what I was going for, and sort of her interesting way of presenting herself in the books. And I thought that there was like a lot of stuff I could do there, trying to sort of explain some of her like fashion choices and things like that, to the extent that they needed explanation. I just thought that, you know, it would be really fun to play with. And the other thing was the fact that her mom's missing from her life now, which helped me sort of figure out how to theme this, especially because I'm not really someone who has any, even though I wrote it for, the Trans Women Challenge, I am not someone who has any authority speaking on what it's like to be a trans person. And so I was really cognizant of that. And so I thought, well, I could frame this in terms of like someone trying to capture this other part in their life, which for Luna is the absence of her mom, and trying to find her mom and ultimately finding her mom in herself. So she just gave me a lot of ways to play with different things for the prompt, so that I could be as respectful about it as I could.
It's really beautiful. Well done. I mean, you wrote this over a year and a half ago almost. So this challenge too had a lot of fantastic entries in it. I'm gonna have to go back and read more of them now. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Oh, you also wrote this in second person. You did a lot. There's a lot of you. What was the reasoning behind using that point of view instead of like first or third?
So I don't use second person very often, but I've done it a couple of times in the past, and I use it when I want to the story to feel really introspective, because to me that's what second person sounds like. If it's not like, sometimes you get stories that are second person, they feel like a choose your own adventure, like it's telling you what you, the reader, are doing. But I think that what's really nice about second person is I think it can almost feel like you're in the person's head. Like it almost feels more like an internal stream of thought than even first person sometimes. And I I felt like second person would just, it kind of brings a sense of immediacy to it. And then the other thing too was Luna is just ridiculously difficult to write and characterize. And I honestly think that second person allowed me to sort of sidestep some of those issues, because it's just more like, the narration is more like what she's experiencing herself and thinking to herself, rather than what she's saying and doing that other people can see.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make, because we really do only see, I mean, obviously the books and canon are written from Henry's perspective, and even with the films, we don't even have as much of her in the films as we do in the books. So
yeah.
She's just the fun little odd girl in the movies, and yeah, that's a really good point. Of she is a hard person to capture well and to do it correctly, especially for the ages that we really see her.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. You also have there's a lot of very specific imagery that you use in this. You want to talk about your choices for the specific points of imagery, like a lot of the moonlight and the sleeping type themes that are throughout this?
Yeah, so I mean, the moon with Luna seemed kind of obvious, and it was like it kind of presented me an opportunity to be like, oh, that's how she picked her name, right? The moon. And I wanted the piece to have sort of this very like ethereal, peaceful feeling to it. And I think that that's something that's evoked by the moon, and the idea of her being herself the most when she's sleeping, and she looks the most like herself, which allowed me to do some of that fun stuff with her, like trying to catch how she looks sleeping in the mirror. But it's also kind of like when you're sleeping, you're at a state of rest, and so you're not trying to present anything to the world. And so I just thought it was kind of like something I could do with the moon kind of casting the real light on how she is. And that part really all came from her name. And then I guess another thing I used heavily as a theme was the jewelry, which I wanted to do because she wears such peculiar jewelry that I thought it would be fun to try to explain like why she does it or why it's meaningful to her. And so I thought, oh, well, the earrings can be something that she inherited from her mom, and that's why they're special to her. And then, well, what am I going to do with the butterbeer cork necklace? And, it sounds like something a kid would make, like a handmade craft. So I just kind of thought that it would be an interesting way, that it was my idea of how Luna expresses her identity as a woman. And, something that she would have been allowed, something that she could use, particularly as she's not interested in dresses. We don't really hear necessarily a lot of other especially feminine things about her in the books. But, something that could not only tie her to becoming a woman, but also tie her back to her mom, because jewelry is something that can be passed down and has, for a lot of people, has a lot of sentimental value. So that's why I really like playing with that.
Nice. Yeah, I loved the descriptors you used for all the jewelry and such. And something else that really stood out to me was how you chose to write Xenophilius. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. I've never said it right.
I think so.
What was your thought process on not only writing him as being like accepting and saying, yes, this is what's happening, this is true, I accept you and all of that. How did you decide to characterize him in that manner, and why did you decide to do that?
He's like such a weird guy, and I just didn't.
That's why I'm like, you made him so lovely, and he just is written as his oddball in the book. So
yeah, like I just don't. I was like, oh my god, what do I do with him, right? But like, I guess in the books, okay, he and Luna seem to have a very mutually respectful relationship. So that was one thing, and I knew that he always had to be supportive of her. And it makes sense that he would, because he's so accepting of other things that a lot of people wouldn't be accepting of. So I sort of, but I wanted to put something in there, like make him not just an oddball, but, you know, he's a human being and he's a man who's lost his wife. And so then, like, when his daughter says, can I wear mom's jewelry? And he's like, this is not going to be Pandora's jewelry anymore. You know, once it's Luna's jewelry, it's not Pandora's jewelry. And that's weird for him. So, you know, I needed to have something in there like real humanity that he has. But I think also, you know, because Luna in the books is so, she's just very direct about what she's thinking. And Xenophilius is like, when you see, like, he has no filter, you know, like when he's at the wedding and he's being really weird. So I think he would be pretty direct about his thoughts too. And so when Luna comes to him and she's like, I'm not your son, Linus, he's like, oh, okay. Like, well, tell me more, you know? So, yeah, that's kind of how I went with it, but he's like a really weird guy. So
I think he did an excellent job. Carl says he's a good father doing the best he can. And I agree. I agree, yeah, because in the book, Luna was what, like 8 when Pandora died? So
I think so.
That's hard.
Yeah.
When you have an 8-year-old child and they lose a parent, that's hard.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, so you have Luna deciding, you know, coming out before school even starts, and then the letter comes with her chosen name, which I think is a fantastic touch. What made you choose to have her come out even like before entering Hogwarts and having it happen like that summer right before? Versus like later on in her Hogwarts career. Was that a conscious choice or more of a subconscious choice?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, you know what? I think it was pretty much a conscious choice because I wanted to do the thing with the letter. And I kind of wanted to have her identity more fixed when she goes to school. And I also, you know, wanted to get at the idea of her being able to realize very young that this is who she was. That it wasn't something that, you know, that it was something that a child can know about themselves, which, you know, I don't think you necessarily see represented as much. Uh-oh. I think things have frozen on my end.
Bye.
Oh, now I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, internet's not great here.
No problem.
Well, this was a fantastic story. I think I read it when you actually posted it, and this was lovely to get a chance to reread it. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It was
fun. Otherwise, be on the lookout soon, everybody else, for the submissions read for next month's Fic Night. The lovely end of November, nice fall weather, hopefully times. And until then, we'll see you around the forum. Have a good night.
Bye.